Hello, hello, hello. Today we are going to be looking at the human impacts on the biosphere, and there are quite a few of them. Before we get into the human impacts, though, remember that the biosphere is all of the biotic or living things and abiotic non-living factors on Earth. Remember, some of those biotic things are pretty much anything that's living, so your plants, your animals, your microorganisms like bacteria, as well as your huge organisms like whales, anything that is living. And then our abiotic factors are things that are non-living in our ecosystems like soil, sunlight, temperature, amount of water, as well as our nutrients and things like the pH. Also remember that biodiversity is the variety of species in an ecosystem. Quick, can you remember how many types of biodiversity are there? We talked about this quite a few times. There are 3 types of biodiversity. Remember, we've got species biodiversity, which is what we typically think of, where we have a lot of different species in a given area. We have ecosystem biodiversity, where we have a bunch of ecosystems in a different area, like maybe we have a river, which has its whole ecosystem. Maybe we have bushland on one side of the river, and then maybe we have forest land on the other side of the river. The more biodiversity generally we have in an area, the healthier the ecosystem is. And then our 3rd type of biodiversity, again, is genetic biodiversity, or the variation of genes within a given species. My example, as always, is typically the classroom. We have a wide variety of genetics. You all don't look alike. You don't have the same hair color or eye color. You don't have the same tastes. You don't have the same preferences. You aren't the same height. You don't all have the same shoe size. We're all pretty different. That is our quick and easy 3 types of biodiversity. So some of the human impacts to the biosphere, most of them are negative. Unfortunately, one of the things that is pretty negative that humans do to the biodiversity, or one way that it really impacts it, is habitat alteration or changing habitats. As our population increases, we need more space for things like farmland so that we can make more food for the people. We need more places for the people to live. We need more factories so that we can produce things that all the people use. So when we build and make all those new wonderful things, we're often taking away the habitat of animals. Even if we still leave a little bit of their area, we're definitely altering or changing their habitat. Our question here is, why are ecosystems with a high biodiversity more stable than those with fewer species? Biodiversity often leads to less diseases, and the species and ecosystems are less likely to be endangered. This is specifically talking about genetic biodiversity for the most part. When we have a variation of genetics, we often find individuals that are able to withstand whatever disease or pest that's going on. Those individuals live, and then they pass on their genes, making the species less likely to be endangered. Habitat destruction, though, is when we lose the habitat due to loss of resources of the ecosystem. So this could be because we've built an apartment building right on top of where the animal used to live, or organism, because it could be a plant too. But this could also be something like a factory is polluting the water system, and then that ecosystem is still there. We still have the river, but that ecosystem is no longer livable because we've polluted it so much. So it could be taking the entire area away, or it could just be making it unusable to the organism by pollution or what have you. What are some human activities that cause habitat loss? You've got a couple listed on your sheet. Can you think of any more? We've got monoculture, deforestation, and urban development on our sheets. Some of the other things that can cause habitat alteration or loss are things like just increasing human activity in an area. So say perhaps we leave the ecosystem as is, but maybe we tour it or we run boats through it or something like that. That is polluting the ecosystem if it's a waterway, as well as it could be terrestrial too, but the waterway is the one that's coming to my head right away. So that waterway is still usable by the organisms. They can still live there, but the more human activity we have, like the boat motors, can catch some of the animals in it, and it'll hit them and hurt them and kill them. Like our manatees often get hit by boat motors in Florida because they're very slow and they're very big. So our boat motors, while they can still live in the waters of Florida, the boat motors are making it harder for them to live, so things like that. Remember, monoculture is when we are just planting one type of crop. Again, this is not only bad for our ecosystem because we're taking the land that was once forest land or wild land and making it a field, but we know that when we just plant one type of crop, we lose a lot of nutrients in our soil and we decrease a lot of biodiversity because we've just got that one type of crop. And you learned that biodiversity is really important for preventing pests and diseases. So if I decrease my biodiversity because I only have one crop, my crops are super susceptible to diseases that can pass to our native species. We learned in our lithosphere unit, though, there are alternate ways of farming that are much better for the environment. We talked about agroecology, where we plant and create farms that mimic that of what we find in nature or the ecology, and those are pretty good for the ecosystem. Deforestation, which is the clearing of a forest, or taking down, deforesting an area, or taking the forest away. When we clear a forest, your animals pretty much have two choices, and we said it in class, and it seemed kind of harsh, but it's true. They either relocate, find another place to live, or they die, the unlucky ones. So taking away not only the homes of the organisms because they might have lived in the trees, you might have taken away the prey of the organism because the organism ate whatever was living in the tree, and you also took away their shelter as well as any kind of protection that they might have had from predators. They can't really hide anymore. So deforestation, again, is an issue. Remember when we talk, especially around here, where we've got a lot of logging and timber companies, a lot of the timber companies and logging companies that we know and see today try to farm sustainably. They replant the trees so that the forest can rebuild itself. So it's not all bad, but as with everything, we need to make sure we're doing it with the environment in mind. And then the last one is urban development or urbanization, building of cities and houses and what have you, factories. When our cities expand because we need more area for our growing human population, it reduces the biodiversity because it reduces habitats for organisms. So it's really hard for many of our wild organisms to live in the city. I mean, we wouldn't, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's city coyotes now. So the coyotes have popped up in like really, really urban areas. Like New York City is a big city. So I think something like that. They haven't shown up in New York City. It was over in more of the California area. But they are now living in there. And I mean, we think that's odd. We're like, whoa, what is this coyote doing here? But they're just adapting to the environment which we have created for them to quote unquote live. They're trying to refine that habitat. Many other organisms do the same. Again, these are just 3 examples, but there are many, many more examples of how humans are increasing habitat loss for animals. Remember, habitat are the places where the animals or organisms live. And then overharvesting is also one of our human impacts to the ecosystem. Overharvesting is when we harvest crops or animals faster than we can grow them. Some examples of species that might be overharvested in North Carolina are fish. We can overharvest things like timber as well. How does overharvesting reduce biodiversity? We're taking away species, which means that we're decreasing the variety. So we're taking away genes basically from that gene pool and making those genes not be able to be passed because we've eaten the fish, so they can't pass on those special genes. But also, if we take more than the plants/animals can give, remember we talked about populations being able to rebound or to regrow after we've taken some. So we don't want to take too many to where that population can no longer rebreed and recreate the population. That's why we have hunting laws. We've talked about this. Look at that typo. We've talked about this before. You can only hunt so many, and I won't try to guess which ones they are because I don't know. It's a certain number of does, a certain number of bucks a season, because if you take too many from the population, there won't be enough. So I want you to think that maybe we have a population of like 10 deer. Say I come in and hunt 6 of those 10 deer. Now I only have 4 deer left, and say of those 4 deer, only one of them is female. The female can only have, I think, 1 deer a season. That's a big guess, but I'm pretty sure they only have 1 deer a season. So then the next year I have 5 deer, and then say I hunt 3 more deer that season, then I only have 2. And then do you see how it just goes on and on? The population can't rebound. It can't become what it was before it hunted the animals. So it's called hunting sustainably, or making sure that the population can regrow from what you've taken. It would be like, if you want a plant example, I have a basil plant, and if I took off all of the basil leaves, say I was making a big pot of spaghetti, so if I took off like all the basil leaves of my basil plant, and maybe I just left one leaf left, my basil plant's gonna end up dying, and then I won't be able to use it again. So when I harvest my basil, I only use a few leaves at a time so that my plant can keep growing and keep doing what it does, so that I can have a continuous crop of basil. If I take it all at one time, I'm not gonna have any more basil. The global impacts are more of why do we care if we're losing biodiversity. Species can become endangered or extinct. We know that we've caused the extinction of quite a few species, the dodo bird, a lot of our marine mammals, as well as some of our giant fauna that we used to have historically, like our giant ground sloths, the woolly mammoth, all those kinds of things. Those have become extinct, and we don't want any more of our species to as well. Another important part, so maybe if you don't really care about the animals, that didn't really resonate with your heart, but when we take too many, or our biodiversity is too far impacted, we get unbalanced or unstable ecosystems. And then that's important because we use our ecosystems. We do things like harvest oysters and harvest shrimp. If we unbalance that ecosystem in some way, we're not going to have any oysters or shrimp to harvest again next year because it's unbalanced. The world is very, especially when you look at the biodiversity and the biology of it, the world is very connected, very circular. So when we upset one thing, it's going to upset a bunch of other things. It's like a chain reaction. Why is it important to preserve biodiversity? It preserves stability. If you think about our food webs, we've already studied food webs. What happens when I take one organism out of the food web? Kind of chaos. It takes a while for that. If it does, it takes a while for that food web to rebound and become okay again. But say if I take like all of the producers out of a food web, what's going to happen to all the organisms that are in that food web? They're going to end up dying because we don't have a base of our food web anymore. And then if we preserve biodiversity, it helps ensure that we have food and resources for ourselves and later generations. So it is really, really important that we are protecting the life on Earth. This is my exit ticket. If these are the main points, kind of, you should be able to answer these questions. So I want you to explain how humans are impacting the biosphere. This will hint come up on your test someday. So tell me what humans are doing to the biosphere. Is it positive? Is it negative? Why is it? What are we doing? And then predict, because tomorrow we're going to study human population increase. So as my human population increases, what will happen to the Earth if negative human impacts do not stop? So if my population of humans is increasing, what's going to happen to the biodiversity? I guess is my question. What do you think? All right. Have a great day, guys. Copy your notes down, turn them in, and I will talk to you next time.